Hey, gang, I've got a question for you. What does President-elect Trump's visit to the newly restored Notre Dame Cathedral this weekend have to do with the very nature of his presidency? There's a very profound connection between the two, and it's going to absolutely blow you away. Can't wait to share it with you. Also, we often talk about how we can maintain and build up the conservative way of life. And one crucial aspect of that is your routine. Staying strong physically and mentally isn't just about living longer, it's about living better. I partnered with Beam because they're a health and wellness company that's put in the time and rigorous research to craft science-backed solutions that truly optimize every system in your body from the moment you wake up until you lay your head down to sleep. More specifically, I've been using Beam Dream for a while now. I've been telling you guys about this. It's amazing. It's completely changed the way I sleep. I mean, I used to toss and turn while my mind raced at night, but since taking Dream, I fall asleep much faster and even sleep all throughout the night. It's an absolute game changer for me. Beam Dream is made up with the highest quality sleep promoting ingredients to help you unwind and get that deep sleep you need and deserve. It's become, frankly, a nightly ritual of mine that I look forward to each and every day. Plus, I never wake up feeling groggy the next morning. I even wake up before my alarm, which is something I never ever used to do. I have the best deal I've ever had with Beam. So now's your time to give Dream a try. Shop Beam's Cyber Monday sale all week long and get up to 50% off site-wide for a limited time. You heard that right. That's half off. Don't miss out on this offer. Click the QR code on the screen or use the link below to propel your wellness journey into the next stage today. Well, it is finally here. The restoration of the Notre Dame Cathedral in Paris, one of the wonders of Western civilization that we almost lost 5 years ago. The ceremony is expected to attract approximately 50 heads of state and governments from around the world, and the one and only President-elect Donald J. Trump will indeed be attendance on Saturday for its first official mass since the fire. Trump took to Truth Social and he wrote, quote, "It is an honor to announce that I'll be traveling to Paris, France on Saturday to attend the reopening of the magnificent and historic Notre Dame Cathedral, which has been fully restored after a devastating fire 5 years ago. President Macron has done a wonderful job ensuring that Notre Dame has been restored to its full glory." Now, that restoration to Notre Dame's full glory, ironically, almost got completely thwarted. I don't know if you remember, but shortly after the cathedral was ravaged by fire, it appeared that the destruction of the cathedral was actually, ironically, just the beginning. The French Prime Minister's office announced that there would be a competition to determine the design of the rebuilding of the roof and the spire of the cathedral that, of course, was lost to the fire. And among the proposals, if you can believe it, there was one by a British architect. I can't believe it, since I'm British. I can't believe it. But one by a British architect that proposed the building of what he called a graceful minaret to replace the spire. He advocated for an Islamic minaret to be built on the top of perhaps the world's most iconic cathedral. And his justification was that it could serve as a memorial to the hundreds of Algerians who were killed by French police while protesting the Algerian war back in the 60s. So we'll put a minaret there as a symbol of protest. And there were all kinds of bizarre proposals for the purveyors of French postmodernism. But fortunately, the vision of Notre Dame's original glory was salvaged. It was rescued. It was saved, you might say, by the French Senate, of all places. The French Senate actually stepped in and saved us from the aesthetic incompetence of postmodern architects and artists by passing a law that required that the Notre Dame Cathedral be rebuilt and restored to its original grandeur. The senators passed the restoration bill with one important addendum, and that was that the cathedral must be restored to exactly how it was before the devastating fire. And it does appear that that is exactly what they did. So President Trump will be attending the reopening of the cathedral this Saturday. And what's so interesting here is that this is Trump's first overseas trip he's taken since becoming the president-elect, which raises the question, what do the two have to do with each other? How does Trump's attendance at the reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral as his first overseas trip relate to the entire purpose of his second-term presidency? Well, Trump has made it no secret that he's been going through a rather profound spiritual rebirth since his life was almost cut short back in Butler, Pennsylvania on J13. And you know what he said, right? He said it over and over again. Why does he believe his life was saved by God? Micah, do you have that clip?
People have told me that God spared my life for a reason. And that reason was to save our country and to restore America to greatness. And now we are going to fulfill that mission together. We're going to fulfill that mission. The task before us will not be easy, but I will bring every ounce of energy, spirit, and fight that I have in my soul to the job that you've entrusted to me. This is a great job. There's no job like this. This is the most important job in the world.
I love it. This is the most important. This is an immaculate job. Trump is going to Notre Dame. He is going to the cathedral that has just been restored to its original glory in order to receive the divine blessing he will need to restore our nation to its original glory. Trump's life was spared to save our nation, and he will begin by going, as his first official overseas trip as president-elect, he will begin by going to the place where that very God who saved him restored his house, restored his cathedral to its original glory. Absolutely amazing stuff. Now, as if it doesn't get better, as if it couldn't get better, there is now officially a Bible boom going on. Did you hear about this? That's what they're calling it, a Bible boom. It's being widely reported that Bible sales are through the roof. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Bible sales have increased by 22% as compared to this time last year. Book sale tracker Circana Bookscan, they just released data showing that Bible sales through the end of October, through the end of October this year, are up 22% as compared to 2023 sales. By contrast, in October of 2023, Bible sales were up by only 1% as compared to the previous year in 2022. So there's a very significant surge in Bible purchases. And again, as reported by the Journal, this buying spree is being fueled by first-time Bible buyers. Again, by comparison, in 2019, Bible sales had hit approximately 9.7 million. But in the first 10 months of 2024, Bible sales hit nearly 14 million, marking a 41% increase. Now, as to why this is happening, the Wall Street Journal cites pervasive worries in our population about the economy. They're concerned about conflicts abroad and they were concerned there was uncertainty over the looming election as factors that pushed readers toward the sacred scriptures in droves. And those are very interesting reasons given because they all seem to exemplify a radical failure in secular society to provide a sense of moral security. That's a term that is used to refer to the various ways in which our anxieties and our concerns are regarded as morally important. In other words, if we're concerned about something and at the same time believe that something greater than ourselves shares that concern and is actually personally involved in that concern, then ironically, we become less concerned about it. We're in effect freed to cast our concerns onto something greater than ourselves. That's the notion of moral security. And our rather secular society being comprised of a combination of cold, standardized, sterile protocols, along with bizarre, insane, and twisted social activism is just radically devoid of any semblance of moral security. So this is one of the reasons why scholars are seeing this phenomenon of retraditionalization, where more and more populations are going back, as it were. There's a great return to historic cultures, customs, and traditions, most particularly our religious traditions, that are serving as sacred solutions to secularism's vacuousness. And it does look as if that's what we are seeing here, based on the fact that the stated reasons for the surge in sales for Bibles found no comparable secularized solution. Now, speaking of the rabid secular liberals, speaking of rabid secular liberals, over at Salon.com. Now, I read Salon so you don't have to, okay? Because this is like the center of just hysterical wokeness. But they are freaking out over the prospects of Pete Hegseth becoming Secretary of Defense. And that freak out has to do with their fear that Hegseth represents a rising theocracy, a patriarchal theocracy to boot, in our midst and in the very center of our government. I'm not going to bore you with too much of the details of the article. It's really just a hit piece when all's said and done. But it faults Hegseth for being deeply involved with the Association of Classical Christian Schools that I was a part of for 18 years. We've talked about ad nauseum here. And also for attending a church that belongs to a conservative denomination, many of you know, called the CREC, or the Communion Reformed Evangelicals. We just had Doug Wilson on a couple of days back. And the article obviously denounces both organizations for being theocratic and intolerant and misogynist, and all the other boring epithets that you can think of. And they're so concerned that Pete Hegseth is now going to bring those very theocratic tendencies to the very center of our Defense Department, blah, 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 blah. But what I found so interesting here in this article, in light of what we were reading about with this Bible surge, this Bible boom, with Bible sales up 20%, 40% in the last 2 years, what I found so interesting there is how devoid the writers are, or the writer is, of any sense of self-reflection and introspection. And thus, how the article inadvertently perpetuates the very scenario it so resoundingly denounces. So what I mean here is that if you read through the piece, there isn't a hint, there's not a shred of self-awareness or inward, reflection on how perhaps the weaknesses and futilities inherent in modern leftist liberal wokeness may actually be fueling this theocratic rise that they're so hysterical about. Again, very similar to what we talked about with the surge in Bible purchases of late. The Wall Street Journal suggested that our modern secular world simply does not have the frames of reference that can provide the moral security needed to effectively assuage the concerns, uncertainties, and anxieties that we all face in this fallen world. And to me, at least the Wall Street Journal is giving us, this is the kind of honesty. It's the kind of transparency about the secular condition that enables us to better understand why people do what they do, even if we were to disagree with it. Why people are turning back to God at the rate that they're doing right now, why they're turning back to faith traditions, particularly conservative faith traditions. If we don't understand that this is perhaps largely or in part related to the recovery of a moral security that secularism doesn't have, then we're not understanding why they're doing what they're doing. And what's so fascinating is when you read through this Salon article on Pete Hegseth, what's so fascinating is just how absent any sense of self-awareness, self-accountability is for this theocratic rise that Pete and classical education and CREC churches purportedly represent. And this is so interesting because there are a number of very, very fascinating studies on the return of theocracies in the modern world. We've been talking about this quite a bit in the last year, and it's a kind of archeo-future outworking of politics that's replacing the postmodern with a more theologically grounded archeo-modern, right? Where we're seeing the triumph, the triumph of this grand reopening of Notre Dame Cathedral this weekend, where Trump is going to be attending. In many ways, this attests to the very same thing. Like we talked about earlier, the French postmodernists wanted a total makeover of the cathedral after the fire, with the absurd suggestion of an Islamic minaret replacing the Christian spire, right? Again, it's so pomo, right? But by God's grace, all of that absurdity was completely overcome by a far more retraditionalized, archeo-modern inspired restoration, which restored the cathedral to its original glory, because that original glory has innate purpose and worth and so on. But the key here, what the woke leftists over at Salon are seemingly so oblivious to, is that there are a number of scholars who are recognizing that theocracies, particularly what they're calling constitutional theocracies, right? So there's a whole spectrum of what a theocracy is. So there's kind of these hardcore mullah theocracies, but then there are theocracies that are actually very limited in power because they're limited by constitutional protocol, but they get their laws, they derive their laws expressly from an overt religious tradition. So there's a whole spectrum there. But what they're finding is that the rise of constitutional theocracies, they're making quite the comeback today, precisely because they are the thoroughly logical, organic solution to the fundamental problem posed specifically by secular governments. So what if it turns out, what if the deepest, most profound, most pressing problems we face as a society only have theological solutions? What if the only possible solutions to some of the most pressing problems we face are explicitly theological? What if the only ultimate solution to our demographic decline and our failing marriage rates, or the problem of cultural flourishing and the awakening of human affirming art and music and architecture, or the threat of war and conflict, or common ethic and morality and standards of truth and meaning, or a true education? What if the solution to all of these problems were ultimately theological, ultimately religious? Well, that would mean, by definition of a secular liberal society, that would mean that such solutions are forbidden. Secular societies, by definition, exclude and disenfranchise and discriminate against those very solutions, the only solutions. Such solutions, by definition of a secular liberal society, cannot even be considered, let alone enacted. Which would then lead to the question, to what extent are virtually all the social, economic, cultural, and international challenges that we face today, to what extent are they the result, the inherent consequence of secular liberalism's expulsion of those theological solutions? It's a shame that the writers of Salon are more interested, frankly, in slandering and maligning and defaming someone and organizations than give a moment's reflection as to how their own worldview, how their own secular life world actually contributes to the rise of the very theocratic dynamics they so viscerally despise. And unfortunately for them, the joke's on them. Obviously, the last election demonstrated, at least in part, that most of our nation today simply don't believe that secular liberal societies have the answers or solutions to the problems that they themselves create by virtue of their secularity. And so more and more populations are looking outside their political establishments to act as, for those outsiders to act as disruptors to politics as usual. And we're seeing it with Pete Hegseth. We're seeing it with these recent massive Bible sales that are going through the roof. And we're seeing it with the reopening of the great Notre Dame Cathedral, restored to its original glory, where President Trump will attend this weekend as he prepares, by God's grace, to restore our nation to its original glory as well.